Great. Yes. Hi, I'm Philip. I'm here on behalf of Serokell, a company. We specialize on software delivery, customized to the clients. Like what people want. This talk is about Nix, so I'm here on FOSDEM 2023, of course, and my talk is Pitfalls of Nix and how to avoid them. So at Serokell, we use Nix.js for infrastructure. We use Nix for CI/CD, setting up dev environments. Basically, everywhere you can use Nix, we try to adopt it. Just because Nix is great, you have all the reproducibility and everything that comes with that, right? So this is me. All my socials are here. If you want to reach out to me, my GitHub. So Serokell, as I said, is a software company focused on creating customized high-performance solutions. So this is mainly in the functional programming realm of Haskell and stuff like that. People want customized solutions for certain problems. Exactly right. So again, this talks about Nix. The goal of this talk is to make Nix more approachable, right? So when we adopted Nix, I wasn't there then. All of the developers weren't using Nix, right? And they still, they try to, right? So there has to developers that into Nix, and they had some issues. And I want to touch on that just so that a case study of how Nix works in Serokell. I'm pretty new at Serokell. I'm part of the SIE team. I try to push Nix too. And oftentimes we have developers coming to us and saying hey, look, we have this new project. How do we set up Nix for it? And how does this work with Nix? How does this work? How do we make our Haskell code reproducible in CI? How do we deploy stuff? It's usually very similar to what has been asked before. So I just want to summarize some key points of problems that we dealt with. First of all, what is Nix? A small introduction. I think most of you, it's been asked before, know what Nix is and what Nix does, especially if you're here in this dev room. Just a small, Nix is trinity of 3 different projects, the Nix language, the Nix package manager, and the Nix OS operating system, but they're not interchangeable. Most of you will know that. So it can be quite confusing when you're talking to people about Nix. What exactly you mean, if you mean the language or the package manager or Nix.js. So a lot of people call those interchangeably, but it's very important when talking to people new to Nix, to separate that. Benefit of Nix, of course, reproducibility. With most of Nix, when you build something and you build it again, you will have the same output, unless it's impure or whatever. You can make very easy cross-platform builds compared to say, so before I worked somewhere else and we dealt with Fortran. Right, on a supercomputer, as in a cluster of different systems. Writing code for that always had its challenges, because you had to keep in mind of the compiler flags. There was a bunch of makefiles, and was a big mountain of maintainability. It was not easy to work on. Well, adopting Nix would have helped solve that, but there's also the whole setting up Nix, teaching everybody Nix. That's always a hurdle that you have to overcome, right? Of course, declarativity. With Nix, you have everything like a recipe, right? You don't just say, hey, I want this cake. You say, hey, you need the eggs and you need the milk. It can be quite verbose, especially when you're new to Nix, to say, hey, I need all of these inputs. Whereas, different build tools, modern build tools, Cargo, whatever, they make it easier to infer dependencies. With Nix, oftentimes you have to do it yourself and add everything. That can be quite terse too. Did I mention reproducibility? It's for me the key point of Nix and why I use Nix. But there's also downsides to Nix, right? We all know them. Documentation, error messages, the recent changes to core, the flags, adoption, everything. Especially people new to Nix currently, when they hear about flags or when they learn about Nix and they read tutorials about flags, there's a lot of confusion and what is flags, I assume a lot of you have dealt with that. Talking to people about Nix and flakes, and most of you have seen error messages in Nix, where it's there's this big trace down to some very deep built-in libraries. But all of that is not really part of what I touch on here, because all of that is in progress, right? But these aren't issues that you can easily get rid of. So the specific problems that I will touch on, these have been started. So when people start with Nix, they're always what do I do? What do I try to accomplish? What do I, get out of it? Even now, okay, right. I don't want to shout at the people in front of me or spit at them. Right. Beatbox. Right, okay, right. So all of these, resources for getting started if you're new to Nix, most of you will know these. You probably always know these. So these awesome lists on GitHub. There's awesome web dev, there's awesome, for every language. There's also now some NICs maintained by NICs community. The NICs user groups, very welcoming. Of course, also on distros Matrix and Discord, people will always try to help and respond to that. And also the very recent tutorial Zero to NICs, I read over and I think it's pretty good. So I give the recommendation. And NICs.dev has like a collection of like resources. So there's not really an easy way to like combine all of those into like one, like make NICs like the most like approachable or like super easy. But when I recommend NICs to people, or like when I talk to NICs about NICs to people, or like when people ask me, I usually recommend these, right? I'm pretty active on Matrix and Discord myself. I look over distros, people will always be there and try to help. The NICs community is very helpful. Disk space, right? Who doesn't know the disk space issue with NICs, right? The NICs store can easily grow out of control. You have this new shiny NVMe, and all of a sudden, bam, 500 gigabytes of that is the NICs store, right? There's different approaches to that, right? So when people, especially like developers in our company, right, that just want to use NICs for like running like the CI or like the build step, they don't want to have everything, right? But that just comes with NICs in a way that it's like a necessity. So we have some certain servers so that they can use for their like CI steps if they want to try it. But if they have to do it like locally, then you can optimize NICs store. I personally use a file system ZFS that compresses NICs store. For some reason, the NICs store is very easily compressible, at least what I use. So I have like double compression almost, which is like really good. But it always comes down to there's no real way around it, just because like how NICs works. You can like put a band-aid on it, or just like we do, give them like a server to work on, right? But it's not always an option. Then we had a lot of concerns actually. I'm not sure like where that comes from. Our developers asked about lingering files, so they were like, and this hooks into next point too. Configurable base system. What if I just want to try NICs, right? Just run it. Will it like interfere with my base system, right? Like I have an Arch Linux, and what if, will it deinstall something? Will it break something? I have all of these dependencies. Will it do anything to that, right? That's a very common concern. So like my answer is always like NICs is contained in the NICs store. NICs doesn't really go out of there, and NICs just behaves. Besides, you having to like alter the path or whatever to like get to the executables. But besides that, basically, if you want to deinstall NICs, it's just remove the NICs store and remove some, users NICs build or whatever. But besides that, there's nothing, as far as I know, that NICs does outside of the NICs store, right? Because it's so contained. And the last point that I want to touch on is secret management, right? So secret management is a very, very painful point in NICs because the NICs store is world readable, right? So in order to have reproducibility, everything has to be in the NICs store, but secrets obviously shouldn't be in there, right? You don't want people to look at your secrets for like, GitHub tokens or CI tokens or AWS, right? So there's several ways around that. Usually it revolves down to using a different like service to integrate it at runtime. Personally, I use SOPSNICs. SOPS is a tool by Mozilla that decrypts encrypted secrets at runtime and mounts them in the /run directory, which is much better than having them in NICs store. Say somebody steals your hard drive and they can just easily access your secrets. At Serokell we use Vault. HashiCorp's Vault is basically a dedicated server that you fetch your secrets from when you need them, right? So you authenticate with the server and you say, hey, I need this secret, and there's all of these access control for different users. And it's really great if you have a dedicated server you can set it up on. I have a small home lab too, as mentioned in previous talk, but I don't feel the need to set a Vault just because it's like limited to like 5 systems. And so I just use SOPSNICs with like runtime encrypted secrets, which is really like useful to me. Naively, there's also like home age for like user secrets, which is pretty good, like age encrypted secrets, in contrast to GPG. But that's mostly it, really. You can't use secrets. I mean, you shouldn't use secrets in plain text in the NICs store. That's just, insecure, really. Always keep in mind, NICs is a programming language, right? So people expect that NICs is a configuration language. People, when they ask me, they're like, what can I do with NICs? And I show them like this derivation and like, wow, is this like YAML? I'm like, no, this This is completely different. This is a full programming language, and Nix is just so different from any kind of configuration tool that people expect for operating systems that it's really hard sometimes to change your mindset on how you set up your system, how you set up different services, and to accept the fact that you use a whole programming language just to configure the build of your script, right? There's also a lot of pain points that people have with Nix itself as a programming language, with it's untyped, it's typed but not statically, it's dynamically typed, it's syntax, but that's just you can't really do anything about that besides telling people, hey, look up how to program in Nix, really. Yeah, that's pretty much it. I'm open to any kind of questions. When I prepared this talk, I had a test talk at Serokell, and there were a lot of questions that come in that contributed to the points that I touched on. If you have any questions, you can, of course, turn to Discord or Matrix, or you can just quickly pop some. I think we have some time, right?
Yeah.
Right. So, yes, yeah.
I've seen during this couple of talks that Nix is quite oriented towards distributability. How would you characterize it in terms of using it as a monolithic OS?
Oh, how would I use Nix.js on a non-distributed environment?
Yes.
So on a local system, really.
Yeah. Plain old operating system.
A plain old operating system, right? So when I got onto Nix, right, when I first learned it, that was 3.5 years ago. I used Arch Linux, right? The whole I use Arch, by the way. Now it's haha, I use Nix.js, but Anyways, and I started out with Nix as a package manager on Arch, and I slowly replaced just my configuration, as a user. And for a long time, I just used Nix.js on my own system, without having so my home lab only grew in the last 1.5 to 2 years. So to me, on a monolithic system, without distributing or pushing it anywhere, Nix.js just has the upside of being so declarative, really. So on Arch before, I would install some random package to try it out, right? And I would completely forget about it, right? And I wouldn't deinstall it, and it just eat up memory, and you couldn't really tell the system, hey, I haven't used this in I mean, you probably could say, hey, if I haven't used this in anyways, on Nix, right? You have this whole, you have basically a list of packages you want to install. And if you want to remove something, then you just delete from the list, you rebuild, and it's still there, but it's not in your system. And next time you garbage collect your system, it's done, right? So that, to me, was a complete paradigm change in how I approach my system configuration as a monolithic system. Also just driving all kinds of services, right? I never write my own systemd service anymore. I just hook into Nix and it runs. Yes, over there.
On your last point about the Nix language,
yes.
Your solution there was essentially just to look it up and learn it. I was curious which type of persona you had to deal with, and have you ever gone down the route of creating a custom DSL instead of letting your user deal with the Nix language?
Mm-hmm. So the difficulties of the Nix programming language, yes, that was the question. If I recommend them any DSLs like Nickel or whatever, in contrast to just saying, hey, just look it up and learn it. I looked into Nickel and different DSLs. There's also a Rust rewrite or a Haskell rewrite of Nix, different rewrites. What it boils down to for me is that all of these rewrites or DSLs will not always catch up with the main Nix language, right? So if you have a say rewrite in Haskell and there's this new feature in Nix where all of a sudden Nix flakes, right? Imagine Nix flakes completely new, and you don't have that in the DSL. You don't have the compatibility for that. You're not keeping up with the main Nix language, right? I'm not going to say it's a necessary evil, because that implies that Nix is hard to learn or terse or whatever, and I don't think that. I really appreciate the functional style of Nix, but it doesn't come easy to lots of people. What it boils down to for me is to embrace the way Nix is and not try to fight it, right? Compared to, enforcing your own kind of views on how it should be. Just try to, feel into it and, see how people think this is done. And then maybe you can do your own DSL to, layer over that with your own beliefs, right? This is open source, You can fork Nix. There are lots of people here, I know at least one, fork Nix to add some extra features, right? And you can easily do that. It's not, the solution for everybody. It just involves a lot of reading into the source code, understanding it. It's a lot of effort. But that's pretty much it.
Realise what you said. You could fork the operating system. Yeah?
I meant the Nix language, as in
fork the whole of Nix packages.
You can do that
if I
too.
had all of you working on it, yeah, we could do our own operating system right now. We could be Red Hat right now. That's never been possible.
But it's
think about that.
But it's the Nix and FOSDEM, so we're going to stick with Windows confines for now.
Right. Any more questions? Time's up. Okay. Right. Sorry. Okay. Right.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.